Hi, Up With People world. I am Donna Reed, and I traveled in Up With People in 1976, Cast A. If you've watched any of these videos, you should be able to check that off on a Jeopardy test. You should know that already. And my guest this morning is Deborah Baker. And I'm just going to say before I have Deb tell us a little bit more about herself that I have been interviewing and doing this now for about 2.5 years, and I have yet to have interviewed someone who is Native American. And that may be because we don't have as many Native Americans who have traveled. So, Deb, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Yeah,
Um,
glad to be here.
all right, so you put your name in there that probably was when you traveled, right? How do you pronounce that?
Yes. Sikyakuku.
Sikakuku. Sikakuku.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sikyakuku was my maiden name at the time that I traveled.
And when did
And
you travel? When did you first travel?
I traveled in 1981 with Cass C.
Okay. C81.
However, yeah, Sikyakuku. And that is a Hopi word coming from the Hopi tribe. So that is where I'm from.
Okay.
Located in northern Arizona.
You were telling me like an
And
hour north of Winslow? Is that right? Is that what you said?
yes, and about an hour. So if you drive on Highway 87, which will take you north of Winslow,
Yeah.
and you drive until the road ends,
Yeah.
you're in Second Mesa on the Hopi Reservation.
You're there. And so for those of you that don't remember anything about Arizona or haven't driven through, if you're doing a Route 66 trip, you're probably going to stop in Winslow and you're going to go take a picture where the eagle's standing on a corner by the car and truck and
Right.
all that stuff. So, do you prefer Deb or Deborah? Do you have a preference?
Either way, Deb
Okay.
is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, my castmates created a nickname for me during our year.
Oh, what was
Uh,
that?
yeah, because they couldn't say my last name, and
Yeah.
I don't even remember who, but at some point I got the name Kuka.
Puka. Oh, that's
So
fun.
that's what my cast refers to me as.
That's awesome. I had a nickname which I will not say here. My 1976 people will know it, and I'm still in therapy. No, I'm not. So, it's interesting you say that about your name because I interviewed a young man that traveled in 2013 or 14 with my son from South Africa. And his name, whew, so he just goes by NK. And it's just so interesting how certain things come naturally to us and other things
Mhm.
don't. So,
Yeah.
all right. So how did you learn about Up with People, or where did you see a show and that's what got you interested?
No, I never saw an Up With People show. I never even knew about Up With People.
Wow.
Um, because I was born and raised on the Hopi Reservation, at the time, we did not have a local high school.
Oh,
So I'm one of the kids who had to leave the reservation and go to a boarding school or, whatever the case may be. So I'm still in that generation that I'm at the very end. Although there are still kids who are in boarding school today, but our experience was much different.
wow.
So because we didn't have a high school on the reservation, we had to leave Hopi. And so my parents had us enroll at Winslow High School, which is, just 60 miles away. Winslow is a public school,
Okay.
but they had dormitories there for Native kids. And
Wow.
so that's where we stayed. We stayed in the dorm and attended the public school.
And do those dorms still exist? Do you know?
Yes, they do.
Wow. So
They
you
they've been
Hopi,
remodeled and
okay.
there's a whole new building now, but
So
the
students
dorms
still
are
do
still
this.
there and kids are still boarding in
Okay.
that place attending Winslow High School.
Wow. And so did
Yeah.
you is that where you saw a show or learned about Up with People, or was it after?
I never saw a show.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, I never saw a show. I got involved with music, with choir, and I also was involved with our high school dance
Okay.
troupe.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed singing. And I got really involved. I was not just part of the main choir, but I was also part of the madrigal. I was part of a quartet. And, we did all kinds of different performances in the town of Winslow and some of the surrounding communities. And so, for me, it was my dream at that point to become a singer.
Okay.
And, I wanted to perform and be a singer. And you have to understand, as a Native person, the best way to describe it is that many Native people, especially Native people who are born and raised on the reservation, we do live really in two worlds.
Mm,
You have your Native traditional cultural life, and then you have your life as a mainstream American individual.
yeah.
And so many times you're going back and forth between, those two things. And, as a young person, I was, in high school. And when I graduated, I was 18 years old. So as an 18-year-old, I wanted to be part of mainstream America and live that kind of life. So, being a singer is something that I wanted to do. I wanted to pursue. And of course, this was way beyond before American Idol, all those shows. So the opportunity like that wasn't there. But I'm sure if it was, I would have done it. So at any rate, so I'm at the dorm one weekend. I had stayed a weekend, and on Sundays, kids get to go home over the weekend. But for whatever reason, I stayed that weekend. I was in the common area, like the living room, and I was sitting there, and this woman, older woman, I guess that she was a parent or something, came to sit by me on the couch. And I was a senior, and she asked me, what year are you? And I told her I'm a senior. Well, what are you going to do after high school? And I said, well, I I'd like to become this singer. And I'm not quite sure how to do that, but I'm figuring out what my plan is. And this was in the fall, so it was, pretty early on in the year.
All of
And she
80,
says,
all of 80 going into 81.
yes, it was
Okay.
fall of 1980
Okay.
going into 81. So she says, really? Well, I have a son who just traveled with this group. And that's how I learned about Up With People. Apparently, her son had traveled,
Wow.
and she told me all about the program and what a wonderful time he had. And he got to travel, and they did the show. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, okay, I'm in. That's all she had to tell me. And I knew from that moment that is what I wanted to do.
Wow.
So I asked her to send me the information. So, she, like a couple days later, I got a phone call, and she had given me a phone number to Up With People. And again, this is before cell phones and
You couldn't
internet. And
Google things. You couldn't. Yeah.
no, you couldn't. You had to do the mail or
Yeah. Yeah.
an actual phone call on a rotary phone.
Yeah.
And so I got the number, and the dormitory there had a payphone. So I called Up With People and told them I had found out about the organization I was interested in joining, and what is my next step. So I don't remember who I spoke to, but about a week later, I get a package in an envelope in the mail, and it's an application to Up With People. So I didn't tell anyone. No one knew of my plans because, I had heard the statistics, like 5,000 people interview every year and only like 400 get selected. I'm like, oh God, what are my chances? So, like, I'm not saying anything to anyone because if I don't get accepted, then no big deal.
Right. Right. Yeah. But yeah.
So yeah, so I filled out the application, put it back in the mail. So, and then, so this whole process takes time. And I must have been maybe near Christmas or maybe right after Christmas. It had to have been after Christmas. Um, I get another package in the mail, and it's from Up With People. So I open it up, and, I had everything sent to the dorm because,
Oh,
I
okay.
had everything sent to the
Sneaky.
dorm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I opened and I remember this moment. It's just seared into my mind. there was this little hallway between the living room and the dining area. So there's this little hallway. So I go into the little hallway and open the envelope, and I open it, and the first words I see are, "Congratulations, you
That
have
gives
been
me chills, Deb.
with people." I'm like, "Oh my God, oh my God." And so I'm like jumping around and yelling, and everybody's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" Because I'm living there with how many other
Yeah, yeah,
young people.
yeah.
So
Hmm.
that was my introduction to Up With People. And I still didn't really know too much about the organization. Of course, they send a pamphlet and
Yeah.
stuff, and all I knew is that, you got to pay this tuition. I
Well,
was like,
that's okay. So how much was tuition in 81?
I believe the
Remember?
tuition was like $6,000,
Okay. It was about just
somewhere
under
around there.
4. It was 3,900, I think, when I traveled in 76. So that would make sense, And so
Yeah.
did
So,
you get
yeah, it was.
did you get any scholarships?
I did. I
Okay.
did get a scholarship. And then, of course, I had to tell my parents because, because like I'm going. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I was going.
Oh,
So I went home and told my family, and we started the fundraising, and I raised as much money as I could between January and May or
May.
June.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got a scholarship, and of course my parents, supported me with the rest of it.
That's awesome.
And
That's awesome.
I just remember making that trip to Tucson. My parents had an RV, so we piled all my stuff in the RV along with the family. I have 5 sisters,
Okay.
and so we all trekked down to Tucson
Yeah.
and getting there. And I just remember walking into, I don't even remember what building it was, but I remember walking into that building
Probably
to
McHale or
register.
something. I don't know. Or was it, I don't remember where we first went.
Yeah, but I remember walking into that building to register, to check in, and it was a huge room, and 3/4 of the room was filled with luggage. And I'm just like, oh my God. And all these people, I'm like, all right, okay, here we go. And
So, so I want to go back to something that you said
sure.
because, when I started this, I said I've been talking to several people who are Native American, some who 100%, some raised on the res, some not, and some who embrace it and some who don't. And I had just watched a movie, and I had asked a friend of mine who's Navajo, who grew up in Chinle, if he spoke Navajo at home and what that was like, and 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 the traditions. And in this movie, it's called, have you watched Fry Bread Face and Me? Have you seen it?
No,
So
no, I
it's
haven't
it's
seen
about
it.
a little kid in San Diego who's Native American, whose mother sends him to the res for the summer. and
Okay.
um and the culture shock for this kid who didn't ask to go there, doesn't want to be there, has an uncle who's, a grandma who only speaks Navajo, who he doesn't understand anything she's ever saying
Yeah.
and stuff.
Oh
And
gosh.
and as I think part of doing these interviews for me, and part of what I think is missing in our world right now, is understanding that we come from different places. So everything that's back here in our brains is the result of that, right? And
Yes.
and so I grew up in a town of 500 people settled by 9 German brothers. We have towns named after tribes. We have Mohican
Hmm.
State Park. But I didn't grow up with any Native Americans. So being here in Tucson has been, for 24 years now, a very different experience.
Yeah.
And those who left and never went back to the res, and those who stayed. But when you said two different worlds, tell me what that first week was like. Did you feel like, oh my God, I've really entered this other world at this point?
Yes. Yes. You go through this mental transition. And you just know that, okay, I'm in this world now, and this is where I'm going to operate. And
Okay.
so, you just need to um, follow the customs and ways of that mainstream world.
And did you, were there any other Native Americans in your cast or that you know that traveled that year?
Later, I learned that there was, I think at least one other. Her name is Rainey Edwards,
Okay.
and she and I met, and she's I believe she's part Navajo,
Okay.
and she was with Cass D, so that's how I met her.
Okay.
Because that year Cass D was actually traveling through Navajo. So they left
Ah,
Tucson and traveled through Navajo for 2 weeks.
yeah.
And so I got sent to travel with Cass D from Tucson. And
Ah,
so that's how I met Rainey. And so that was a weird feeling of, practicing and rehearsing with your own cast, and then you leave Tucson and like, oh no, I'm sorry, you're not getting on that bus.
yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
getting on this bus. And
Yeah.
so I spent 2 weeks with a cast D because they were going through the Navajo reservation.
And they wanted to have probably the representation of another.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think
that's how I met Rainey. But
our first show was in a Gallup. So that's where.
oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So we did that. But going back to your question about, being native and operating in these two worlds, it really is, when you come back to the reservation, especially when there's a cultural activity happening, you have to change your mindset,
Mm,
and you have to change the way you think and the way you approach people, the way you interact.
yeah.
And where I come from in Hopi, the culture and tradition is still really, really intact. And so there's different roles you have depending on what the ceremony is or who you're interacting with. And depending on who they are will determine, how you interact and
Yeah.
what you will contribute and all those kind of things.
And do you speak Hopi?
The pace is just much slower.
Yes.
The pace is slower. You have to learn how to be patient, and you have to learn to listen,
Mm,
and you have to understand that there's a lesson to be learned in everything. So you don't rush through things. You take in everything, all from all your senses, and understand that all of this is part of the experience. And then when you transition into, I guess, mainstream society,
right.
the pace is just picks up, and there's just so many other things that you don't need to worry. You almost have to put yourself as a native person, as your culture, somewhat to the back burner.
Mm,
And because some of how you are as a native person, or how you experience life as a native person, is not always relevant in the mainstream world.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
I can only imagine. Yeah.
coming to Up With People, I knew that. I knew that, myself as a native person wouldn't be as prominent as, me being able to successfully maneuver through what I was going to be going through. But thank God I had some experience prior to that, because
Right.
I was 18 years old when I traveled.
Right. But at least you had been in Winslow, in school, in and done some other things that with
Right.
the
So
music and the, yeah.
yeah, and prior to that, in junior high, in my 8th grade year, I got sent to live with my uncle,
Oh,
who was in the Marine Corps, and he was
ah,
stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
oh, that's
So
a big difference.
yeah, so I got to live with him for a year,
Wow.
which I think was really the experience that paved the road for me, because that was my first time away from Hopi,
Mm.
and living in a different place among different people, and seeing and
So,
how the world operates there.
so let me ask you about traveling on the road. I think that
Mhm.
we all practically could reiterate what we said to host families when we arrived in their homes and the questions because they were the same and things like that. So if you I am going to assume that your experiences were the same but elevated at some level, because I think for me, as a basic American white girl from Ohio, that whatever, nobody cared about what my heritage was, my aunts, or any of that. And I would imagine that questions for you were really interesting. And if you had a roommate and stuff, did people inquire deeply about you and where you were from? And I'm wondering what I would have been like as a host.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think, you're with host families for such a short period of
Right.
time.
Back then. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just overnight,
Yeah.
sometimes it's 2 nights. You're lucky if you got 3, 4 nights with a family.
Right.
And I think it were those families where we stayed at length, where we were able to have those kinds of conversations.
Right.
I would always tell them where I was from and that I was Native, and I even took my traditional outfit with me,
Me too.
and I hauled that around with me the entire year. I never wore it in the show,
Oh, wow.
because at the time there wasn't a place for that.
Well, that's
But I
interesting.
would take it and I would, dress up in it if my host family showed me, or if there was ever an opportunity for me to do a presentation about it, I had it with me.
Nice.
But that was like a whole nother suitcase that I probably didn't
I
even
was
think
thinking that it probably
carrying
weighed
around,
a
but I did, and
Interesting.
we were so limited with what we could carry. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's what I did. So it just depended on the family,
Okay.
how interested they were in learning more about who I was and the community
Yeah.
I came from. And I think it also had to do with the amount of timing that we had
Yeah.
when we were there. But those families that did ask were really interested. And I think majority of the families, I was their first experience,
That's what I was
experiencing a
thinking.
Native
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I, you know, I guess it never dawned on me that that would be the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's
you know,
because you're you and you have your background in your family. So you just know you're you, right? And then
right.
you don't realize that to someone else, you are going to be very different than they, you know.
Yeah. But I knew that because, growing up, my parents were starting to get involved with tourism.
Ah,
And so they would host, tour buses and talk about Hopi with, this is who we are in a 1 hour spiel or whatever.
yeah. Yeah.
So I knew that intellectually, I knew that.
Right.
But I think to experience it firsthand, um, was a different thing.
Yeah.
I didn't have my parents speaking or talking on my behalf, or I was the one having to do that. So
Right.
I was so glad that I had been there when they were doing that,
Yeah.
and I had listened,
Yeah.
you know.
All right. So because of our time, I want to ask you, before I get into the last little kind of up with people-y things, you
Sure.
you live in, oh, it says 10 minutes. Crap. Okay. you you live and work back where you were raised, right? Tell
Yes, I do.
give me
Okay, so
a couple minutes about what you do.
sure. Well, let me take you through a quick
Okay.
thing. Okay, so after Up with People, I came back home, and the plan was I was going to be at home for a little while because I had been away for a year and I need to
Yeah.
see my family, and then I had a host family in Sweden who had invited me to come back and stay with them for a
Okay.
time. So that was the plan. But things happen the way they do, and I never did.
Mm.
And so I went on to do other things in my life, and I uh, eventually went back to school and got married, had children, went back to school, and finally came back here to the Hopi reservation. So I'm a social worker by profession. I
Yes.
have a bachelor's and master's degree from Arizona State University, and I came back, and when I came back, I had to opportunities are not many when you come back to the reservation. And so I had the chance to work in a school. So I said, okay, let me try that. I've never dreamed that I'd be working in a school. My husband is a high school PE teacher.
Okay.
So he's been working his entire career doing that. So I did, and I loved it. I loved it, and I've been working with schools since then. And so right now, I'm currently working at HOPI Day School, which is one of our elementary schools, and I'm the parent liaison. So I work with parents and families here at the school. You know, I support families. I try to get them involved in school, and I host parent programs, you
Yeah.
know, to try to get them to connect with the school, things like that.
So I want to make sure that I get this in, but you know, when I talk to alumni about where we go, is it the people or is it the places, or you know, is it both? Because as I go through, how many years do I have left of life to travel, to go? Where do I want to go? Do I want to go back and see somebody again, or should I go somewhere I haven't been? But I want to come to where you are. You know, my son went to school in Flagstaff. I'm going to Pine Top this weekend, and I thought,
Oh,
I should come meet you in person. I should see. I haven't really been on a reservation. I've driven through the Navajo res, just traveling um,
right.
that direction, um, literally since the 70s. I just passed through, you know,
Yeah.
and I
Well, do come.
yeah, I think
Do
it'd be
come.
fascinating.
You know, where we're located, we're about 2 hours east of the Grand Canyon.
Okay.
So, you know, your trip will be worthwhile.
Yeah. No,
And,
I think
you
it'd
know,
be
there's a
fascinating.
lot to see in the area as far as, you know, places, interesting places to visit.
History.
And on Hopi, you know, it's a special place. It really is. Many people who come here say
Oh, that's
that they
interesting.
just feel a sense of serenity, sense of peace when they come here. The
Nice.
landscape is beautiful. You know, where I live on top of the mesa because that's,
Do
you know,
you?
we
Wow.
have three distinctive mesas. And my backyard, when I go to my backyard, I can see the San Francisco peaks from my backyard.
Wow.
I can see at nighttime sometimes the light rays of Winslow, and
Oh,
that's 60 miles away.
that's awesome.
Um, so there's this big panoramic view from my backyard. It's just beautiful.
That's awesome.
Um, we have the best sunsets in the world, I think.
I don't know. Lots of
But
people argue. People on the water say they do. People don't.
right, well,
All
I
right.
agree with that
Yeah, yeah.
too. But you
All
know,
right.
you
Let me
can't
ask
be
you a couple of quick up with people questions. Was there
sure.
any food that you tried on the road
Oh God,
that you would never eat again?
yes.
Okay.
As you're saying that, I know exactly what I'm going to say.
Okay.
Um, pickled herring
Oh, in Sweden.
in Sweden. I will never ever eat that again, ever. You know, I was very open-minded. I
Yeah.
tried things,
Yeah.
but no, that I just couldn't handle that.
Well,
So I would never try that.
anything you had for the first time that you love and you appreciate now?
Yeah, I was really well, of course, all the cheeses. Who could not
Oh yeah.
like all the cheeses in Europe?
Right.
But in Sweden, they also had this thing called milk.
Okay.
It's kind of like
Like a yogurty
a
thing?
cross between yogurt and a thick milk,
Yeah.
buttermilk or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But I was amazingly thought that was tasty because I don't do dairy very well, but you know,
I like that.
I enjoyed that.
All
I
right.
don't know how I would feel about it now.
Yeah, I know, right? Right. Okay, we have 4 minutes.
Oh,
Favorite song from your show.
well, you had asked a question also about what song did I think felt represented our year the
Okay.
best.
Okay, then tell me
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
So I would say Shape It Up.
Ah!
Shape It Up because, you know, rap was just coming into play at that time. It was a strenuous, very upbeat
I
song.
can picture
Uh,
those costumes.
yeah, and you know, my cat, we were in the 80s, early
Yeah,
80s.
yeah,
So
yeah,
we would have some cast members who would add like a
yeah,
headband or
yeah.
leg warmers. And
Oh
yeah,
my
when I
God.
look back at it and see pictures, like it just depicts
Yeah, yeah,
that era really
yeah.
well.
That's fun. All right, I have to wrap it up. I want to ask you real quickly. You know, Up With People has changed, it's evolved. Now they're doing these across the country things. They're going to India and stuff. Is there anything that you could say in a minute that you might say to a young person who wants to experience something similar to what we did, not identical, but that you might encourage someone?
I would tell any young person, put away your fear, down your guard, and just do it. Just jump in with both feet and do it. You know, a lot of times I think we overthink things
Yeah,
and like, oh, I don't know about this. I don't know. You know, this is an opportunity that you have to take. You know, I was 18 years old when I traveled.
me too.
The Up With People experience has enriched my life so much. Even today, I'm still drawing on that experience, you know, um, since 1981. And I just can't say enough about what you're going to gain and how it's going to just enrich your life. I can't say any more about it.
I
It was the best thing that I ever did.
You and me both. You and me both.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. Good luck with your office move and everything happening up there. And I
Yeah.
just so appreciate you sharing from your heart and some of your history. And I do hope we meet in person one of these days. I'm like, I always am going other places, and I'm like, I should go to Northern Arizona,
Yeah.
right?
So, you know, I don't get to Tucson very often, but when I do, I'll make sure to give you a call. And,
Save
you
my
know, hello to
information.
everyone, our Up With People family.
Yeah,
You guys are the best.
awesome.
Be a good person,
All right,
and we shall hopefully meet you one day.
I agree. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks, Deb.